The salt spray, a constant kiss on my face, did little to wash away the grime that had settled deep into my bones. 10 years. 10 years since I traded the sterile gleam of precinct lights for the suffocating embrace of the open sea. My fishing boat, the Sea Serpent, bobbed restlessly beneath a sky bleeding into bruised twilight. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned, not by a long shot. It was a penance, a self-imposed exile, a quiet drowning of a reputation that had once roared. The hum of the engine was a low thrum against the vast silence, a sound I'd come to find more comforting than any human voice. Each creak of the hull, each slap of water against the weathered wood, was a familiar language. It spoke of solitude, of routine, of a world where the only shadows were cast by the moon and the only prey were the silver flashes beneath the waves. Then the crackle. My old police radio, relic I'd refused to part with, sputtered to life. It was a ghost, a phantom limb of a life I'd tried to sever. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the dial. The sea offered oblivion. The radio offered a return to the gnawing ache of what I'd left behind. "Cole, I there." The voice was tinny, unfamiliar, but laced with an urgency that snagged my attention like a snagged line. I keyed the mic, the click echoing in the small cabin. "This is Cole." My voice, unused to conversation, sounded like gravel. "Cole, it's Sergeant Davies. From HQ, the name meant nothing. We've got a situation, a big one, the kind that, well, it's got my name written all over it." My gut tightened. "Davies, I'm retired, miles offshore. I don't do situations anymore." "I know, Cole, I know. But this is the jeweler's vault on Sterling Street, smashed wide open. No alarms tripped, no witnesses, no forced entry, clean as a whistle. Except," he paused, and I could practically feel him searching for the right words, the ones that would land with the impact of a depth charge. "Except the way they did it, the precision, the signature." My knuckles, gripping the worn steering wheel, turned white. Signature. I tried to forget that signature, to bury it under the endless expanse of the ocean. But it was etched into my memory, a scar that refused to fade. "What signature, Davies?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. The origami cranes, folded from the security camera footage itself, left on every vault door, just like the ones from the Nightingale case. The Nightingale. The name was a phantom limb for me too, a constant, throbbing reminder of my failure. The serial killer I'd hunted for months, the one who'd vanished into thin air, leaving behind only meticulously folded paper birds and a trail of devastation. I'd poured everything into that case, my career, my sanity, and it had broken me. I'd walked away not in defeat but in self-preservation, seeking refuge in the vast, indifferent sea. "Origami cranes," I echoed, the words tasting like ash. "That's impossible. The Nightingale is long gone." "That's what we thought," Davies said, his voice strained. "But this heist, it's identical. The planning, the execution, the damn cranes, Cole. They're all there, 10 of them, folded from the very footage that should have caught them. A taunt. A taunt. My mind, sharp despite its rust, began to churn. The jeweler's vault, Sterling Street. A high-end establishment known for its state-of-the-art security. If someone could bypass that with such audacious flair, it wasn't just a robbery. It was a declaration. Sterling Street downtown, the main branch. The Sea Serpent was a speck, a lonely vessel adrift. But the sea, in its own way, was a network, a transfer point, a place where things and people could disappear. "I'll be back," I said, the words feeling both foreign and familiar. "Get me the details. Everything I have on the Sterling Street job, and the Nightingale case files." The familiar rhythm of the waves felt mocking. The sea had been my sanctuary, my escape. Now it felt like a cage, holding me back from the very thing I needed to confront. The scent of salt and diesel fuel was suddenly tinged with the metallic tang of fear and something else. A grim, unsettling determination. The salt spray stung my cheeks, a familiar, almost comforting bite. Here, 12 miles offshore, perched on the weathered deck of the fishing boat, 12 miles offshore, transfer point, the city lights were a distant smear, a promise of chaos I'd tried to outrun. But chaos, it seemed, had a way of finding me. The transmission still echoed in my ears, the gruff voice a phantom in the wind's howl. The Nightingale, a name I'd buried deep, a ghost I'd paid handsomely to keep interred. And now it was awake. My hands, calloused from years of gripping steering wheels and the cold steel of my service weapon, traced the worn grain of the boat's railing. The rhythmic creak of the hull against the swells was the only sound, a lullaby that used to soothe. Now it grated. The detective, a man whose face I'd only seen in grainy surveillance photos and the brief, sterile exchange at the precinct, had been insistent. He'd spoken of patterns, of a chilling echo from my past. But the seed of doubt had been planted, a tiny, insidious thing that had taken root in the barren soil of my retirement. The Nightingale's signature, meticulous, calculated, and apparently back in business. The thought sent a tremor through me, a discordant note in the symphony of my carefully constructed piece. I'd walked away from the force, from the city, from the crushing weight of failure. I'd sworn to myself I was done. But the Nightingale, that was a debt I'd never been able to pay. The detective's words played on repeat. It's too precise, Cole, too clean, like he's been practicing. Practicing for what? To prove me wrong, to taunt me. The arrogance of it was a physical ache. I'd always been good at seeing the details others missed. It was my curse, my gift. It was what made me a good detective and what ultimately broke me. The Nightingale's methods had been my undoing. The way he dismantled lives with the precision of a surgeon, leaving behind only the shell of what once was. A wave crashed against the hull, sending a spray of icy water over the deck. I didn't flinch. My gaze drifted back towards the distant, glittering smear of the city. It was a siren call, a dangerous melody of responsibility and regret. I should be here on this boat, breathing the untainted air, letting the past remain buried. But the Nightingale's return wasn't just a crime spree. It was a personal affront, a reopening of old wounds, a challenge to the very core of my being. I reached into my jacket pocket, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of the crumpled note the detective had pressed into my hand. "Just in case I were curious," he'd said, his eyes sharp, probing. I hadn't been curious then. I'd been angry, defensive. I unfolded the note, cheap paper crackling in the wind. A list of addresses, dates, and times. The heists. They were precise, almost impassably so. Each one executed with a surgical precision that sent a shiver down my spine. The same meticulous planning, the same unnerving lack of collateral damage. It was him. It had to be him. My mind, long dormant, began to stir. I saw the crime scenes again, not as they were presented to me by the force, but as I remembered them. The subtle nuances, the things that had gnawed at me that I dismissed as anomalies. The way the security systems had been bypassed, not forced. The perfect timing, as if the perpetrator had known the exact patrol routes, the exact shift changes. It was more than just good planning, it was intimate knowledge. The fishing boat pitched suddenly, throwing me off balance. I steadied myself against the railing, my grip tight. This was madness. I was a ghost, a relic of a life I'd abandoned. What could I possibly do? I had no badge, no authority, no backup. All I had was my past, and a burning, undeniable need to see this through. To prove that I wasn't the failure they, and I, had always believed me to be. The detective had mentioned a potential next target. A warehouse district near the old docks, a place where the Nightingale would feel at home, and where I, perhaps, could finally confront him. The wind whipped my hair across my face, tasting of brine and impending storm. The city lights seemed to beckon, a promise of a hunt I was no longer sure I could refuse. I was back in the game, whether I liked it or not, and the stakes were higher than they had ever been. The engine of the fishing boat, 12 miles offshore, Transfer Point, coughed a ragged breath, a sound that mirrored the state of my own lungs. I leaned against the cold, barnacle-encrusted railing, the metal biting through my thin jacket. The city, a spilled necklace of light on black velvet, seemed impassably far, yet its gravity pulled at me, a siren song of trouble. This was my sanctuary, this barbing speck of rust in the indifferent ocean, a place where the ghosts of the past found it harder to whisper their accusations. The heists, 3 now, each one a mirror, a perverse echo of the methods that had haunted my waking hours for years. The precision, the utter lack of collateral damage, audacious targeting of seemingly impenetrable vaults. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a taunt. A gruff cough broke my reverie. The proprietor of this watery haven, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles and whose hands were permanently stained with brine, shuffled towards me. He carried a chipped enamel mug, steam curling from it like a spectral offering. "Thought I might be needing this, Cole," he rasped, his voice like pebbles grinding together. Black coffee. He knew my preferences, a small comfort in a world that offered precious little. "Thanks, not a ripple. They're as ghost-like as I say, but the words getting around, about the heists, and about I. My gut tightened. That was the last thing I needed. My unofficial, self-imposed exile was meant to keep me out of sight, out of mind. But this killer, this phantom I'd failed to catch, was dragging me back into the light. And the light, I knew, could burn. "What kind of word?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "That I rest sniffing around, that I know something. Some of the old boys, they're spooked. They remember the last time this pattern showed up, before everything went south for I." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "Before I lost my badge, before the headlines, before the shame." I took a slow, scalding sip of coffee. It did little to soothe the unease coiling in my stomach. The first heist, a small, private gallery. The second, a high-security courier depot. Both cleaned out with surgical precision. No alarms tripped, no witnesses, no evidence left behind. Then came the third. This morning's news, delivered by a crackling radio broadcast, had been a gut punch. The Federal Reserve's regional bullion depository. Not a small haul, not a casual smash and grab. This was a declaration of war. And the details, sparse as they were, confirmed my worst fears. The same intricate bypass of electronic security, the same meticulous planning to avoid any trace. The proprietor watched me, his weathered gaze sharp. "Heard about the Fed. That's a whole different league, Cole. They'll be crawling all over this. And if they start asking questions, they'll find their way to I, won't they? The disgraced detective who's suddenly showing an interest in impossible crimes." He was right. The authorities, the ones I'd once served alongside, would see my involvement as a red flag, a potential suspect, or worse, a liability. They wouldn't understand my need to see this through, my desperate, gnawing certainty that this was the same monster. They'd see a man obsessed, a man with a history of failure. "I'm not sniffing around," I said, my voice low and hard. "I'm just observing." He snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "Observing from a fishing boat 12 miles offshore. Doesn't look like observation, Cole. Looks like Ira waiting for something, or someone." He was closer to the truth than he knew. I was waiting for the next move, waiting for proof, waiting for a chance to finally, definitively, close the book on the killer who had broken me once before. A distant siren wailed, a faint, mournful cry carried on the wind. It was a reminder of the world I'd left behind, a world now in a fresh state of panic. The stakes had just been raised, not just for the city, but for me. This wasn't just about preventing another crime. It was about reclaiming something I'd lost, something that felt as precious and as unattainable as the distant city lights. My reputation, my peace, my soul. The salt spray was a constant, stinging kiss on my face, a familiar discomfort that always brought me back to the edge of the world. 12 miles offshore. The air hung thick with the smell of brine and diesel, a pungent perfume of the sea. My contact, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard living, gestured towards the hulking silhouette of the fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point. It barbed like a wounded beast, its lights a weak defiance against the encroaching night. "He's on board," the informant rasped, his voice a low rumble that barely cut through the engine's thrum. "Waited for I. Said it was important." Important. That word always tasted like ash in my mouth these days. My past was a tangled mess of important moments that had unraveled, leaving me adrift. But the heists, the cold, precise echoes of the ghost's work, they had pulled me back from the quiet rot of my self-imposed exile. This felt like the only shore left. I climbed aboard, the deck slick with a film of fish scales and something darker, something I didn't want to identify. The captain, a burly man with eyes like chips of sea glass, nodded curtly. He led me to a small, cramped cabin, the air thick with the metallic tang of old blood and stale sweat. Inside, a figure sat hunched over a table, illuminated by a single swinging bulb. The stranger. "Cole," he began, and the sound of my name, uttered by this unknown entity, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. "What is this about?" He gestured to a scattering of papers on the table. Not just reports of the recent heists, but something else. Old files, my old files, the ghost's file. My stomach tightened. "The targets," the stranger said, his gaze fixed on a photograph of a jewelry store, its windows smashed, its contents gone. "They aren't random, not by a long shot." I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the documents. The jewelry store was the first, then a small, independent art gallery, then a rare book dealer, each a seemingly disparate target, chosen for its unique, high-value inventory. "The dates," I murmured, tracing a finger over a faded newspaper clipping. "They're spaced out, years apart in some cases." "Precisely," the stranger confirmed. "And the items stolen, not the most valuable, not always, but unique, singular, a particular Fabergé egg, not the most expensive in the collection, a specific Renaissance sketch, not the most famous, a first edition of a relatively obscure poet." He pushed another document towards me. A list of names, names I knew, the victims of the ghost. "The common thread," the stranger continued, his voice a low hum, "isn't the value of the stolen goods, it's the provenance, where they came from, who owned them before they came to market." My mind raced, piecing together fragments of a forgotten puzzle. The ghost had never been about money. It had been about something else. A twisted sense of justice, perhaps, a performance. The owner, he was acquitted, years ago. Accused of fencing stolen art. The charges never stuck. And the gallery owner, the stranger prompted, reported stolen goods to the police, but the paperwork was messy, a technicality. The items were never recovered. He profited, though, the rare book dealer. He'd been a witness in a high-profile fraud case, his testimony crucial, but then he'd suddenly recanted. The case collapsed. These weren't random heists. They were targeted removals, retribution. The ghost, or someone mimicking him, was cleaning house, erasing the stains of past transgressions. "But why now?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "Why dredge all this up again?" The stranger leaned back, the swinging bulb catching the glint of his eyes. "Perhaps the ghost is back, someone who knew his methods, someone who knew his targets." He slid a single, dog-eared photograph across the table. It was old, the edges frayed, the subject faded. A group of uniformed officers, smiling, posing for a team photo. And there in the center, younger, sharper, a ghost of the man I used to be was me. A man who had been my partner. My breath hitched. This wasn't just about the ghost anymore. This was personal. The mystery was deepening, pulling me back into the murky depths of my past, and I had a terrible feeling I was swimming towards a truth I might not survive. The salt spray, a fine mist, kissed my face, a stark contrast to the stale air of the precinct I'd long abandoned. The rhythmic slap of waves against the hull of the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point, was the only soundtrack to my unease. Below deck, the generator hummed a low, guttural song, a mechanical heartbeat in the belly of the beast. The sky above was a bruised twilight, bleeding from a pale tangerine into a deep, inky violet. He'd agreed to meet me here, this ghost from the edges of my past, this man who'd always moved in the shadows, had tried so desperately to illuminate. His name, when I'd last uttered it, had been laced with a bitter finality. Now, it felt like a forgotten key, rattling in a lock I'd hoped to leave rusted shut. He'd sent word through a series of cryptic messages, each one a breadcrumb leading me further into this watery labyrinth. He knew about the heists. He knew about him. I leaned against the damp railing, cold seeping through my worn jacket. The photograph from the previous night lay tucked inside my breast pocket, a heavy weight against my ribs. Me, younger, and him. The man I was about to meet. We'd been partners once. Before the rot set in, before the lines blurred into an indistinguishable smear of grey. He moved with a fluid grace that belied his age, a predator in his element. He was thinner than I remembered, his face etched with a weariness that mirrored my own. His eyes, when they met mine across the barbing deck, held no warmth, only a sharp, assessing glint. "Cole," he said, his voice a low rasp, like gravel being dragged over stone. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, a sound that had once been a comfort, a promise of shared purpose. Now it was a warning. "You wanted to see me," I replied, my own voice carefully neutral. I didn't offer a handshake. We were beyond such pleasantries. He gestured with a nod towards the open sea, the vast, indifferent expanse. They're getting bolder, aren't they? The echoes of the past. My jaw tightened. You know why I'm here? He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Of course I do. You always were too stubborn to let go, even when it was killing you. He took a step closer, and I could smell the faint, cloying scent of cheap tobacco and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. Those heists. They have his fingerprints all over them, don't they? More than fingerprints, I said, my gaze locked on his. The precision, the timing, the sheer audacity. It's him, or someone who learned his lessons very well. And you think I can tell you who? His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Why would I? I washed my hands of all that mess a long time ago. You were there, I pressed, my voice gaining an edge. You saw what he could do, saw what we couldn't stop. He turned away, walking towards the railing, his silhouette stark against the dying light. We didn't fail, Cole. We were outmaneuvered. There's a difference. Is there? I stepped closer, the deck groaning beneath my feet. Because it feels like the same damn thing from where I'm standing. And now he's back, or his ghost is, and people are going to get hurt. Again. He finally turned back, a slow, deliberate movement. In his hand, he held a small, tarnished silver locket. He opened it, and a tiny, faded photograph slipped out, falling onto the worn wood. It was a woman, her smile gentle, her eyes kind. I recognized her instantly. He was the victim, the first one, the one that had broken me. This belonged to her, he answered, his voice softer now, laced with a weariness that was more profound than any I'd ever known. I kept it. When you get too close. He looked at the photograph, then back at me. He's not just repeating the methods. He's taunting you, the heists, the pattern. It was too perfect, too familiar. But what if it wasn't about the heists at all? What if they were just the bait? What are I saying? I asked, my voice tight. He closed the locket with a snap. I'm saying Ire so focused on the how that Ire missing the why. He wants my attention, Cole, not just my apprehension. He wants to finish what he started. He paused, his eyes holding mine, and he knows exactly where to hit I. My mind raced, replaying every detail of the heists, every piece of evidence. The stolen artifacts, the meticulous planning. It all pointed to a singular, terrifying conclusion. He wasn't just a criminal mastermind. He was a puppeteer, and I was his unwilling marionette. The photograph in my pocket suddenly felt like a burning coal. We were in that photo together, a symbol of a partnership that had imploded, leaving behind only ashes and regret. The transfer point, I responded, the words tasting like ash. This isn't just a meeting place for the stolen goods, is it? It's a delivery point for something else. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He's not just stealing objects, Cole. He's collecting pieces of you. The generator's hum seemed to intensify, a thrumming in my bones. He'd revealed a crucial piece of the puzzle, but in doing so, he'd also thrown a thick fog over my path. The realization hit me with the force of a rogue wave. I had been so consumed by chasing the ghost of the past that I had walked directly into the present danger. This wasn't just about stopping a killer. It was about preventing a personal annihilation. And the man standing before me, the man who had once been my partner, had just confirmed my worst fears. I had walked into a trap. The salt spray kissed my face. A cold, damp greeting as the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point pitched and rolled beneath my feet. The generator's rhythmic pulse, a metallic heartbeat, vibrated through the deck, a constant reminder of the artificial lifeblood sustaining this floating purgatory. I'd stared at the cryptic symbols, the almost artistic precision of the crime scenes, for so long that the world outside had begun to feel like a dream. But this was raw, unvarnished reality. The chill of the ocean air was a stark contrast to the heat of the questions swirling in my mind. The information, delivered with the casual cruelty of a man who had nothing left to lose, was a double-edged sword. It cut through the fog of my ignorance, but it also plunged me deeper into the labyrinth. My gaze drifted to the bruised horizon, a smear of charcoal against a fading amethyst sky. The fisherman, a man whose weathered face told 1,000 stories of sun and sea, moved with a practiced economy of motion, checking his nets. He was a ghost in my periphery, a silent witness to my internal turmoil. He hadn't asked why I was here, out on the unforgiving expanse of the sea, with a man whose eyes held the glint of a cornered animal. Perhaps he'd seen enough strange things in his life to dismiss another one as just another ripple on the surface. The Ripper. The name still tasted like ash in my mouth. These heists, each one a mirror image, a macabre reflection of his past work. It wasn't just about money, not anymore. The meticulousness, the almost theatrical flair, spoke of something far more personal. It was a performance, a twisted homage. My fingers traced the worn leather of my notebook, the pages filled with my own scribbled observations, my failed theories. I'd been so sure the Ripper was dead, buried under a mountain of circumstantial evidence and a killer's final, desperate act. But what if he wasn't? What if someone had merely picked up his baton? The man who'd spoken to me, the one who'd traded secrets for a promise of escape, had mentioned a patron. He'd called this patron the Architect. And the Architect, he'd said, had a particular fondness for symmetry. Symmetry. The word echoed in the vast emptiness of the sea. The Ripper's crimes had been symmetrical in their own horrifying way. The precise timing, the seemingly impassable entry points, the targeted nature of the stolen goods, all of it pointed to a mind that valued order, even in chaos. My mind reeled, a chaotic dance of fragmented memories and new revelations. The stolen items weren't random. The first heist, a rare manuscript from a private collection. The second, a series of antique surgical instruments from a forgotten museum. And the most recent, a collection of obscure alchemical texts from a heavily guarded archive. What connected them? It wasn't just their value. It was their history, their esoteric significance. I remembered a detail from the Ripper's case files, something I dismissed as irrelevant at the time. A small, tarnished silver locket found at one of the crime scenes, containing a faded photograph of a stern-faced woman and a child. The Ripper had never explained its presence. It was an anomaly, a crack in his otherwise perfect facade. The fisherman was now coiling a rope, his movements fluid and unhurried. The rhythmic slap of the waves against the hull was a hypnotic counterpoint to my racing thoughts. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure the image of that locket, to feel the weight of it in my palm. The Architect. A sudden, sharp gust of wind whipped across the deck, carrying with it the scent of brine and something else, something metallic, like old blood. My eyes snapped open. The fisherman paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Looks like a squall," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Best be heading back." But my attention was no longer on the weather. It was on the man who had spoken to me, slumped against the railing, his eyes vacant. He'd said the Architect was obsessed with reclaiming what was taken from him. What had been taken, and who was the Architect? Then it hit me, a thunderclap in the silent storm of my mind. The Ripper's obsession with symmetry, the stolen artifacts, the patron who sought to reclaim what was lost. It wasn't about money. It was about retribution, and the locket, the photograph, the stern-faced woman, the child. My breath hitched. I'd seen that face before, not in a crime scene photo, but in an old family album. A face from my own fractured past. The Architect wasn't just a patron. He was someone I knew, someone I had failed. The Ripper's legacy wasn't just being continued, it was being weaponized. And I was standing at the epicenter of a storm I had unwittingly helped to conjure. The fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point, suddenly felt like a trap, and the vast ocean, a closing net. The salt spray stung my cheeks, a cold, sharp kiss from the unforgiving sea. I stood on the deck of the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point, the engine's low growl, a constant, unsettling vibration beneath my worn boots. The air tasted of brine and something metallic, a scent that clung to my clothes like a shroud. My gaze was fixed on the horizon, a bruised purple where the sky met the churning grey water, but my mind was miles away, replaying the stranger's words. Obsessed with reclaiming what was taken. What had been taken, and from whom? The questions gnawed at me, a persistent ache behind my eyes. The Architect. The word itself conjured images of intricate blueprints, of structures built with deliberate precision. Not buildings, though. This Architect built chaos. This Architect planned destruction. My knuckles were white where I gripped the railing. The rain had started again, a fine mist that plastered my hair to my forehead. It mirrored the slick, treacherous path I was walking, each step a gamble. This wasn't just about stopping a string of crimes anymore. It was about understanding the mind behind them, a mind that seemed to echo the darkness I tried to bury. A rough hand clapped my shoulder, making me flinch. I turned to see the grizzled captain, his face a roadmap of weathered lines, his eyes sharp and assessing. He held out a chipped enamel mug. Whiskey, for the nerves. I took it, the warmth seeping into my palm. The amber liquid burned a trail down my throat, a familiar, unwelcome comfort. "Thanks. You're jumpy, detective," he said, his voice a low rumble that barely cut through the wind. "This ain't your usual beat, I reckon." "No," I admitted, the word tasting like ash. "This is where things change hands, where secrets get passed in the dead of night. You come here looking for answers, you're wading into deep water." "I'm already drowning," I muttered, more to myself than to him, the stolen past. It was a tangled knot I couldn't untie. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a jarring intrusion. I pulled it out, the screen illuminating my face in the dim light. A single, unread message. The sender was unknown. My breath hitched. The message was short, stark. "I taught me everything I know about leaving them wanting more." It was a twisted echo of my own past, a cruel mockery of lessons I thought long forgotten. My eyes scanned the surrounding boats. Were they watching me? Was this a trap? The architect knew me, or at least they knew of me. They knew about my past failures, my regrets. This wasn't just about the heists anymore. This was personal. I thought of the woman who had found the note at the last scene, the one who'd been so terrified. I'd promised her protection. Had I failed her too, there was this message, a threat directed at her, a way to draw me out, to make me a pawn in their game. The captain watched me, his expression unreadable. "Trouble." I shook my head, forcing a semblance of calm. Just a reminder of old business. But it was more than that. It was a declaration of war. My past, the one I desperately tried to outrun, had finally caught up. The architect wasn't just mimicking the killer I failed to catch. They were taunting me, using my own methods, my own history, against me. They were playing with me like a cat with a cornered mouse. And the mouse, for the first time in a long time, felt the sharp edge of the trap closing in. I looked at the message again. The final act. What did that mean? There was the next target, someone I cared about. There was the architect planning to strike at the heart of my fragile peace, the quiet life I'd built on the ruins of my former career. The rain intensified, blurring the distant lights of the other boats into streaks of color. The engine's thrum seemed to deepen, a primal pulse against the growing storm. I felt a profound sense of isolation, adrift on this churning sea, with an enemy who understood my every move, my every weakness. They were a tangible threat, a personal vendetta, and I was the only one who could stop them. The weight of that realization settled upon me, heavy as the leaden sky. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival, my survival, and the survival of anyone else who might become collateral damage in this architect's twisted design. I had to move, and I had to move fast. The game had changed, and I was no longer just the detective. I was the target. The salt spray stung my face, a welcome, abrasive truth against the clammy grip of unease. 12 miles offshore, the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point barbed like a wounded gull. Its lights, usually a beacon for weary sailors, now seemed to wink with a sinister intent, a lure cast into the inky black. This was it. The stage was set. I checked the .38 nestled in my jacket for the 10th time. Its weight was a familiar, cold comfort. The wind whipped at my coat, tugging at secrets I'd long buried. The architect. They were bolder now, more brazen. The heists, each a chilling echo of the ghost's signature, were escalating. This wasn't just about stolen goods anymore. It was a performance, a twisted, macabre exhibition designed to draw me out. I watched from my vantage point on the larger vessel, the one I'd commandeered with a few carefully chosen words and a significant sum of cash. The figures disembarking were cloaked, their movements economical, practiced. They didn't speak, not that I could hear over the roar of the waves. They simply worked, a silent ballet of illicit exchange. My gaze swept the deck of the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point. Empty nets lay coiled, smelling of brine and decay. A few crates were stacked haphazardly near the stern. I'd instructed the informant, a twitchy man whose loyalty was as shallow as a puddle, to ensure this meeting took place. He'd sworn on his mother's grave, a gesture that held little weight in my experience. But he'd also provided the crucial detail, the architect's penchant for an audience, for the theatrical flourish. That was the hook, the lure. I was the ghost of their past, the one who'd almost caught them, and they craved the acknowledgement, the final bow. They wanted me to witness their masterpiece. It wasn't just about the act of violence, it was about the narrative. The ghost was a storyteller, and their stories were etched in blood. Now, these heists, these elaborate thefts, they were chapters in a new, unfolding saga. And I, Cole, the fallen detective, was being invited to read along. My contact, a former associate with eyes that had seen too much and a wallet that had seen too little, was supposed to be on that boat. He was the bait, a willing participant in my desperate gambit. He knew the architect's methods, had gleaned fragments of their grand design. He was my eyes and ears, my lifeline in this treacherous game. The transfer was swift. The fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point was left adrift, a solitary sentinel under the indifferent moon. I waited. The tension coiled in my gut, a tight spring ready to release. Every creak of the hull, every slap of water against the weathered wood was amplified in the stillness. I imagined the architect watching, a conductor orchestrating this silent symphony of crime. Were they pleased with the performance? Did they anticipate my arrival? Then a flicker of movement near the pilot house. Not one of the figures from the other boat. This was someone new. Someone who hadn't been part of the exchange. They were carrying something. My breath hitched. It was a familiar shape. Too familiar. A specific kind of lockbox, the kind the ghost had favored. The kind that had contained the trophies of their victims. My mind raced, replaying the details of the original case. The ghost was meticulous, yes, but also sentimental. They kept mementos. And these heists, they were not just about financial gain. They were about recreating the past, about reliving the thrill of the hunt. The figure on deck paused as if listening. Were they looking for me? Or were they simply enjoying the solitude, the quiet satisfaction of their work? A wave crashed against the hull, a sudden, violent intrusion. The figure flinched, then quickly moved towards the railing, as if to secure something. My chance. I moved from my hiding spot, my footsteps deliberately loud on the deck. The wind seemed to snatch the sound, muffling it, but it was enough. The silhouette froze. Then a voice, surprisingly calm, cut through the night. "Cole, I knew you'd come." It wasn't the architect, not the voice I'd imagined. It was a woman's voice, smooth as polished obsidian, and he was standing too close to the pilot house, too close to the crates, too close to where my informant should have been. Hand tightened on the 38. The salt spray stung my eyes, a harsh baptism that did little to clear the fog of disbelief. A woman. The voice, so chillingly calm, belonged to a woman. She stood by the pilot house of the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point, a silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. The crates, stacked with unnerving precision, were mere feet from her. My informant, the rat I'd cornered, was nowhere to be seen. A cold dread, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at my resolve. My hand, slick with sea mist, tightened around the grip of my 38. The trap was sprung, but the quarry was not what I'd anticipated. The air tasted of brine and something else, something metallic and acrid, fear, perhaps, or anticipation. "Ire late, detective," she called out, her voice carrying effortlessly over the wind. It was the same voice from the burner phone, the one that had taunted me for weeks. Smooth, like river stones worn down by centuries of relentless current. I stepped from behind a stack of netting, the worn soles of my boots finding purchase on the heaving deck. The boat pitched, a drunken sway that threatened to send me sprawling. "Where's the merchandise?" I demanded, my voice rough, a gravelly counterpoint to hers. She gestured with a gloved hand towards the crates. "All here, ready for shipment." Her smile, when she turned her head, was a fleeting, predatory flash, though I must confess I expected someone, older, more weathered, more like the ghost I've been chasing. The ghost, my past, a spectre that had clung to me like barnacles. "I know about him." "Oh, I know a great deal," she said, taking a step closer. She moved with a dancer's grace, a stark contrast to the brutal efficiency of the heists. "I know he was sloppy, predictable, a brute. I have a certain finesse, a tragic elegance." Her words were a disarming balm, a silken trap. I kept my eyes locked on her, my finger hovering near the trigger. "And I'm here to collect." She laughed, a low, musical sound that was utterly devoid of humor. "Collect? No, detective, I'm here to deliver." The revelation hit me like a rogue wave, stealing my breath. Deliver? I'd been so focused on the heists, on the echoes of the serial killer's methods, that I'd missed the true nature of the game. This wasn't about stolen goods or ransom. This was something far more intricate, far more personal. I thought it was about blueprints, about structures, but the true architecture was always the fear, the chaos, the dismantling of order. She reached into her coat pocket, and my muscles tensed, ready to react. But instead of a weapon, she produced a small, tarnished locket. It glinted in the fading light. "This belonged to my mother," she said, her voice softening, a fragile thread in the tempest. He was one of his victims, not directly, I understand, but her life was shattered, her spirit broken, and no one ever paid. The pieces began to click into place with a sickening finality, the meticulous planning, the deliberate mirroring of the killer's signature. It wasn't about profit. It was about justice, a twisted, vengeful justice. "I ran at him," I stated, the realization a heavy weight in my gut. "No," she confirmed, her gaze hardening. "I am his consequence." She tossed the locket. It arced through the air, a tiny, glittering projectile. I instinctively reached for it, my focus momentarily diverted. That was her moment. A flash of movement too fast to follow. A sharp, stinging pain in my side. I stumbled back, the .38 clattering against the deck. He was holding a knife, its blade glinting wickedly. So close to catching the real monster. The boat lurched violently, throwing us both off balance. She used the momentum, her knife a blur. I dodged, my training kicking in, but the edge grazed my arm. "This isn't over," I grunted, scrambling for my weapon. She smiled, a grim, triumphant expression. "For I, detective, it is." She turned and sprinted towards the railing, her movements fluid and impossibly swift. I lunged, my fingers brushing the fabric of her coat, but he was already vaulting over the side, disappearing into the churning water below. The locket lay on the deck, a silent testament to her twisted purpose. I sank to my knees, the pain in my side a dull throb. The crates remained untouched. The heists were over. The architect was revealed, not as a mastermind of crime, but as a victim seeking retribution. And I, the disgraced detective, had been played, not by the monster I'd failed to catch, but by the collateral damage he'd left in his wake. The sea stretched out before me, vast and indifferent, holding its secrets close. The wind howled, a mournful dirge for the justice that had been served and the justice that had been denied. The salty spray stung my eyes, a fitting baptism for this grim conclusion. The deck of the fishing boat, 12 miles offshore, transfer point was slick with a sheen of brine and something darker, something that had seeped from the recent chaos. My lungs burned with the effort of staying upright against the swell, but the ache was a dull throb compared to the raw grief clawing at my insides. He was gone, vanished into the unforgiving maw of the ocean, leaving behind only the glint of that locket and the ghost of her impassible grace. The locket. I picked it up, its cool metal a stark contrast to the heat of my palms. It was heavy, intricately engraved with a pattern I'd seen before, etched into the leather of a particular journal. His journal. The one I'd pored over, dissected, and ultimately dismissed as the ravings of a madman. Years of sleepless nights, of chasing shadows, and it all came down to this: a woman, a phantom, a puppet dancing to a dead man's tune. My gaze swept across the now empty vessel. The crew, if I could call them that, were nowhere to be seen. Vanished, like smoke, just as I'd suspected. They were the gears in a larger machine, disposable and easily replaced. But who was turning the crank? Who had orchestrated this elaborate charade, this echo of a past I desperately tried to bury? The investigator had been so certain, so self-assured. He'd built his case on the superficial similarities, the obvious parallels. He'd seen the pattern, but he'd missed the puppeteer. He'd focused on the mimic, never questioning the source of the imitation. And I, in my desperate need for closure, for a neat, tidy resolution to my own failures, had let him. I'd let myself be blinded by the easy answer, the convenient villain. A wave crashed against the hull, sending a tremor through the deck. The boat pitched violently, and I stumbled, the locket slipping from my grasp. It clattered against the planks, a sharp, metallic sound that seemed to mark my disarray. I watched it skitter towards the railing, a tiny, insignificant object in the face of such monumental devastation. My own demons. They'd been the true architects of my downfall. The guilt, the regret, the gnawing certainty that I'd failed those who deserved justice. It had made me a receptive audience for the investigator's narrative, a ready participant in his quest for a swift conviction. I'd wanted to believe it was over, that the specter of the original killer was finally laid to rest, but the locket. The specific, agonizing detail of its design. It wasn't just a copy. It was a deliberate echo, a taunt, a message. I sank to my knees, the damp wood seeping through my trousers. The sea air, once invigorating, now felt heavy, suffocating. I saw it then, the true horror of it all. The original killer hadn't been caught. He'd merely faded. And someone who had studied him, perhaps even admired him, had picked up his mantle. Not out of a desire for vengeance, not out of a need for recognition, but out of a twisted form of artistic expression. A macabre homage. The woman, he was the artist, and the investigator, he was just the easel. My hand trembled as I reached for the locket again. The engraving, it wasn't a signature, it was a date that predated the first of the original killer's crimes. A date that marked the beginning of his asterisk obsession. It wasn't about replicating the past. It was about reclaiming it, about asserting ownership. The investigator's voice, tinny and strained, crackled from my hidden earpiece. Cole, status report. We've got eyes on the rendezvous point. The buyers are here. Buyers, of course. The locket was a lure. The woman, a pawn. And I, a fool who had walked right into the trap. The meticulous planning, the uncanny mimicry, it wasn't just about the thrill of the chase. It was about distraction. A grand performance to mask the real transaction. I looked at the locket, then out at the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean. The resolution I'd been seeking was a mirage. The case wasn't closed. It had merely revealed a deeper, more insidious truth. The hunter had become the hunted, and the true prey was still out there, somewhere waiting for the next act. My gaze fell upon a small, almost invisible seam in the locket's ornate casing, a hidden catch. With a click, it sprang open, revealing not a photograph, but a tiny, rolled piece of parchment. My fingers fumbled with it, my breath catching in my throat. The script was precise, elegant, and horrifyingly familiar. The masterpiece is never truly finished. It read, only abandoned. The waves continued their relentless assault, each crash a punctuation mark on my profound failure. I had come seeking an end, and found only a beginning. The ocean held its secrets close, and so, it seemed, did I. The fog was beginning to lift, not on the sea, but within me, revealing a landscape far more desolate than I had ever imagined.